Good morning to everyone and welcome to our Cyberbrics webinar on cybersecurity and digital sovereignty in the BRICS countries. My name is Luca Belli. I'm professor at FGV Law School, and I have the honor not only to organize this webinar, but also to head the Cyberbrics project. Let me start with the usual disclaimer before I introduce our distinguished speaker. Of course, the opinions that will be expressed by our speakers are personal opinions and do not correspond to any official position of FGV. They have accepted to join this webinar freely, and they know this webinar is public and it is going to be recorded. So we can start with a very brief presentation to give you an overview of our today's topic, our speakers, and the interest of the discussion that we are going to have today with our distinguished speakers. So now the presentation should be already shared. Let me spend a couple of words about our project. The next slide, the Cyberbrics project. Of course, you are very welcome to join our website and to visit our material on cyberbrics.info or follow us on Twitter on Brics Cyber. You will find all the material that we publish, all our events, including this one, and our future publications, events, and know more about our team. Next slide. Today, I have the pleasure to have with me four very distinguished speakers, four good friends, starting with Sérgio Suchodolski, who is the president of the Development Bank of Minas Gerais, and also he was the director of strategy and partnerships of the BRICS-led New Development Bank until a couple of years ago. Oliver Stuenkel, who is a professor at FGV School of International Relations, and he's also the author of the Pathfinder work on the post-Western world. And then we were supposed to have also Anya Kovac, Directress of Interdemocracy Project India. Unfortunately, she has not been able to join us due to a last-minute impediment, but she will be substituted, and the perspective of India will be well represented by our Cyberbrics board member Nikhil Pawa, who is also founder and editor of Medianama. And last but of course not least, the excellent Jiang. She is professor at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and also a visiting professor of the Cyberbrics project. Next slide. Now, the reason why we are here today, of course, is to debate cybersecurity and digital sovereignty in the BRICS, but also to celebrate the release of this freshly published book. It is the first study to analyze cybersecurity regulations in the BRICS countries, first and actually only one. It has been a very fascinating travel to develop this book with Min, with Anya, and with other Cyberbrick fellows over the past couple of years. We analyze 5 key dimensions of cybersecurity regulations in the BRICS: data protection, consumer protection, cyber crime, cyber defense, and also the measures that can allow to protect public order online. Next slide, please. You will find it on the Springer Nature website, but also you can freely download an open access version on our website or using this mini URL. Why this book is so important? Well, not only because the population of the BRICS encompasses 40% roughly of the world population, so the digital policies and regulations of these countries affect 40% of the population, but also all the businesses and individuals that interact somehow with the BRICS. And we will see that over the past 20 years, since the BRICS acronym was first created, the BRICS countries have acquired a key role, a key geopolitical role, a key economic role. Next slide. When we speak about BRICS, of course, we have always to pay homage to Jim O'Neill, Baron of Gatley, and who was the first person to coin the BRICS, which is a small, not a capital S, the BRICS acronym, in his economic forecast with his colleagues at Goldman Sachs. And then next slide, over the next 20 years, the BRICS have been institutionalizing themselves. First BRIC meeting of head of states in Ekaterinburg in Russia, then the South Africa, the capital S in BRICS, added in since 2011. The next slide, and then we have the first institution of the BRICS, the New Development Bank, a development bank created by them together with the Contingent Reserve Agreement. Next slide. And what is very interesting about BRICS is that also it is not very interesting to read it here because I see the font has had a little accident. But what is very interesting about BRICS is that together with their institutionalization, they also started to carefully analyze not only the economic dimension, but a wide range of other aspects, including digital matters. And since 2017, they explicitly committed to advocate for the establishment of international applicable rules for security of ICT's infrastructure and data protection. And this was the first explicit commitment with regard to digital matters they had. Next slide, please. And one of the key reasons why they understood the importance of this is that I think BRICS were the group of countries that best understood the snow of revelation, and they best understood that actually what is all the free services we have online, they are not really free. They are paid with our personal data, and they can also be paid with a waiver of our sovereignty. And this is why the discourse on digital sovereignty becomes particularly interesting, especially analyzing the not very well analyzed and understood BRICS perspective. Next slide. For this, we are now starting a new book project. I have the pleasure of organizing this with Jiang, that is probably the best partner in this venture. And together we will know more about how BRICS are organizing themselves, the role of BRICS, what are they doing with regard to cybersecurity, digital sovereignty, and what they can still do as a group or in different settings. Next slide. I invite you to check our publications. Everything is in open access on our website. And now, without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to our first speaker. I would like to start with Oliver Stuenkel, that as I was mentioning, is probably the most renowned academic in the world with regard to BRICS studies. We can now close the presentation and give the floor to Oliver. Thank you very much, Oliver, for being with us. You are our first speaker. Let me start with the provocative question. Does the BRICS grouping still matter as a geopolitical entity, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this invitation. It's an honor to be part of this, and congratulations for the publication of this fantastic study. I learned a lot, and I just want to say that I've been studying BRICS since the inception of the grouping, and I've been following the summits, and these types of contributions, I think, are exactly the kind of thing that explains why the grouping is so useful, actually, because we are clearly, and I think we don't need to run through the numbers here, we are entering a multipolar world, and the discipline, at least my discipline of political science and international relations, is still very much a Eurocentric or US-centric discipline, with a very limited number still of comparative studies, for example, looking at different countries in the global south, looking at comparative approaches between, India and South Africa, India and China, South Africa and Brazil. So this is precisely, to me, the kind of thing that, all of the community of Brics scholars has been hoping for. And it's really it's a great satisfaction to me to see that these kinds of studies are now advancing, because there's so much to learn from each other in that sense. And that doesn't mean that, Europe isn't important or the US is important. They remain tremendously important partners, but in a way, the emergence, and that's why, to answer your question, I think it's a tremendously important geopolitical entity. There may be differences between the Brics countries, which is natural because they, are placed in very different geopolitical contexts. But in order to have a sound understanding of the future of global politics, it's absolutely crucial to look at this group also and see to what extent they have been able, despite all their differences, to articulate common ideas and common projects. And if you look at the big challenges of our day, climate change, the pandemic, the financial crisis, financial instability, look at 2008, and the arrival of the digital age, the necessity to contribute to better rules and norms in cyberspace. In none of these areas, there can be any progress to tackle the challenges we're facing without the active, not only participation, but leadership of the Brics countries. And that's why, there's been a lot of doubts and continuous questioning of the usefulness of the grouping. But when you look at the studies that have been presented and the ways in which Brics countries are actually discussing very urgent issues at their summits, it becomes obvious that it's actually now much more important than it has been 10 years ago. And my expectation is that it will continue to grow in importance. And that's why I think, again, these kinds of contributions are so important, that we need to learn more, not only to point to the similarities or differences, but also to the ways in which the grouping can provide a constructive role in global affairs.
Thank you very much for this, Oliver. And actually, now let's narrow down the focus on the current state of play of Brics, and what are the key dynamics that are going to shape the intra-Brics relations ahead of the next Brics summit that will be chaired by India.
That's right. So India just announced now the organization of a 3-day virtual summit of the Sherpas, which are the assistants to the respective presidents who define the key issues. And it's really quite amazing that, as would be expected of 5 countries in different places in the world, they are also tensions among Brics countries. And this year, again, the Brics Summit will also be used as a permanent platform for dialogue in a way that it can reduce temporary tensions. That has been the case before. There have been some tensions between Brazil and China, for example. And in 2019, the fact that Xi Jinping and Jair Bolsonaro were able to meet at the Brics Summit was crucial to actually reduce tensions. Something like that happened in 2020. Also between India and China, and is expected to happen here again. Despite these, so that's a big, that's a big plus and a big benefit that the summit produces. But at the same time, you have, in addition to the presidential summits, which gather all the media attention, you have around 100 meetings that take place between ministries, between specialists, representatives of government. And during my research, I've spoken to numerous Brazilian bureaucrats, but also Indian, South African, Chinese, etc., who had many times said that the first time they'd actually been to another Brics country had been thanks to the grouping. So a lot of Brazilian bureaucrats had never been to China before, had never been to India before. So in that sense, this established a bureaucracy to bureaucracy ties, which are absolutely useful. This will go on, but at the same time, a big focus will be on the pandemic. As all of us who are joining us here will know, there's people talking about the vaccine diplomacy, China and Russia and India are three key providers of vaccines, and they can expect it to play a key role in assuring that they will be available also in developing countries. And that, in a way, I think is sort of the interesting role of BRICS countries. You have these major powers, but they're also, in a way, still developing countries. And I think they are, in their day-to-day debates, or let's say in India or China, there's a much greater connection to sort of what are the day-to-day challenges, for example, of a Latin American country or an African country, as is the case in Europe. In addition to that, India has already mentioned that the issue of cybersecurity will be key. The debate about 5G, counterterrorism, so very much related to this book, and that's why I'm very happy that this is coming out now, because I think it will be also quite useful to the decision makers, which will gather either virtually or in person in India later this year.
Yeah, we indeed hope that the book will be useful not only for researchers, but also for policymakers to take evidence-based decisions, indeed based on evidence we provide. And you were mentioning the role of specific countries, and Brazil has played a key role over the past decade. It was a major actor at the international level. And what is Brazil's role in this moment to enhance dialogue and cooperation within the grouping and with other members' countries?
Well, my personal opinion, but again, I'm looking for this from Brazil's perspective, of course, is that Brazil is actually a major beneficiary of the grouping. And that is above all because Brazil has been traditionally looking towards either Europe or the United States. Again, these continue to be very important partnerships, but Brazil is the country that I think was furthest behind in the necessity to adapt to a more Asia-centric world. We have, and I see this on a day-to-day basis as a professor when I talk to my students and they're thinking about their exchange programs. It is still the fact that we have the more students going to France for their exchange than to China. Nothing against France, it's a great place, and I strongly say, why don't you go to France and to China, or why do you spend time in India? Because that's, without a value judgment, that's Brazil's future. I mean, China has for 10 years been Brazil's most important trading partner. Asia in general will be the economic future of Brazil. There's not lamenting or celebrating, it's just the necessity to adapt to this reality. At the same time, I think Brazil can contribute a lot to strengthening BRICS dialogue because Brazil has a very important perspective, has a very important experience. In the past, Brazil has played an important role in public health. It does have a major role to play in climate change and in cybersecurity, actually, and in issues on privacy. There's a lot of issues where Brazil has tremendous experience with engaging civil society in processes about all these issues. And I think there is that role to play. And but again, we need to reshape, I think, the way we look at the world. Just to give an example, our Minister of the Economy, if I'm not mistaken, has actually not been to China in his life. That is something where you say, that's sort of, he represents certainly sort of a generation when that was okay. You could be a knowledgeable person about the world without sort of constantly traveling to Asia, which is no longer the case. And I think I do hope that he will soon visit China, because in that sense, this process of adapting to the fact that BRICS countries are key pillars, not only of the global economy, but of global politics, is a reality. And in that sense, Brazil being part of this will help push Brazil towards this new reality that we're facing in the 21st century. So I think that despite the geographic distance, Brazil is furthest away from all the other BRICS countries. The country continues to have a tremendous role, not only as a participant, but actually as a leader on a series of issues allowing the others to benefit from Brazil's perspective as well.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for this very interesting perspective. And now I would like to give the floor to a very good friend who is not only the president of one of the most well-respected institutions in Brazil, the Development Bank of Minas Gerais, but he is one of the few Brazilians that really played a key role also in the development of the new development bank, this Brics led institution, as a director of strategy and partnership. Your insight, Sérgio, is unique. There is, I think, no one else in the world that has this kind of experience. I'm really very happy to have you here with us today. And Sérgio, while the emergence of ICTs have created new opportunities that also development banks are analyzing, and so opportunities for businesses, for individuals, expansion on connectivity that has become essential as the pandemic has demonstrated, but there are still a number of challenges. And so how do you think that projects as Cyberbrics and this kind of dialogue, cooperation, research can promote synergies and address these challenges that we now see emerging?
Good morning. Thank you, Luca. Thanks for having me. It's a great honor to be joining you from Belo Horizonte today. I would like to salute good friend, Professor Oliver Stuenkel, and also Professor Jiang. Indeed, it's a remarkable journey, right, which you presented quite well in the introduction of this seminar, from Jim O'Neill in 2001, not really knowing that coining the acronym, and especially at that specific year, imagine if a few years were to pass, maybe it would be a different acronym, right? We could have other countries such as Indonesia or Turkey or other countries being included, and perhaps one or other member being excluded. But that's how history is made, and what was an investment banking construction became a political construction, and definitely now with the new development bank and with the CRA and other initiatives, as Professor Stuenkel rightly pointed, so many meetings of not only government officials, but Brics University network and cultural networks, agricultural networks, and others have created a kind of a great opportunity for students, academics, business, government officials to meet on a regular basis. And this, of course, this is what embodies, this is what incarnates what the Brics will be as a grouping, and definitely as a grouping that is already shaping a new world of the 21st century, right? That said, I think it's important to realize also the weight of the population of these countries, right? We are talking about 3.2 billion people in these 5 emerging economies, right? So the increase of the number of internet users in these 5 countries is just huge, and we cannot forget to make references of cutting-edge companies that are leading this process, and they are based in these countries. And I'm not only talking about China. I mean, our friends from Naspers in South Africa probably are very happy that they were early investors in WeChat, in Tencent, right? Which is the holding that owns WeChat, and are able to contribute and really participate in this amazing journey. And I think it's very interesting when we see cross-border collaboration among BRICS countries, and which are, of course, by nature not coming from the North Atlantic, right? So this kind of incarnates what this new world that we live in, and that is led and this is important to make a point here, that is led by emerging economies. So it is a new world order, and it is a reality that it imposes. So as I have made references, and I thank you for inviting me to write the introduction for the Cyberbricks book, I think that Latin America, Africa, Asia will definitely be the regions with the highest user growth in the coming years. As I said, I mean, the next billion users will come from this geography. This will require a long process of adaptation, of learning, and of course the challenges of cyber terrorism, espionage, and all kind of breaches that will need to be managed are already a reality, as we well know, especially in Brazil with the leak of our tax returns and all the information that has recently taken place. I would like to point specifically to the year of 2013, when the 5th Brics Summit took place in Durban in South Africa, because that's when the eThekwini Declaration was signed by the 5 Brics countries, and that recognized the urgency of cybersecurity. And over the years, this has been a very important issue that has been brought by several of the members, and I would specifically point to Russia. Russians have specifically had a great concern over the issue. They are not the only ones, of course, but they have pointed, and in some times, in some occasions, have even created a specific concept uniting cybersecurity and sustainability, which is quite interesting, the way that it has been framed. So the debate from 2013, so 8 years ago until now, has only been intensified in large, and capacity building has grown among countries. So I believe that the Cyberbricks project has a great challenge and opportunity to tackle and study all of these developments going forward.
Thank you very much for this. And indeed, as you were mentioning, the South African Declaration in 2013 is also a key moment, and it is not a coincidence that 2013 was indeed the year of the Snowden revelations. And since then, cybersecurity has not stopped to hit the headlines. We see on a daily basis scandals and revelations, data leakages. Only 1 month ago, a major data leakage happened in Brazil, revealing probably the personal data of the entire population. And there are a lot of vulnerabilities, a lot of weaknesses that could be exploited. And cybercrime and cyber is becoming extremely lucrative. Cybersecurity, on the other hand, still has a lot to do in order to keep pace with the threats that there can be, and also with the mechanism that can be created in order to have better response. What is, in your opinion, what are the steps that policymakers can take to enhance cybersecurity, to provide a better environment in order to mitigate at least this kind of vulnerabilities?
Well, look, I think that's a process that it's ongoing. This is certainly a subject that requires a multi-dimensional approach, and I'm not only talking about, of course, data science and IT engineering, but there are even psychology aspects that are related to it, and all kinds of organizational behavior aspects that we are learning every day, especially related to social media. I think all of us have been reading a lot about it and watching some interesting documentaries that have come out in recent month around it. I believe that not only a governance, an international governance, international one and independent one, needs to be reinforced, but I think that the activity of some kind of a standing cybersecurity police will be necessary. And please, I'm not advocating that we should establish a police-like states. I'm just saying that we need to have professional and well-trained branches that are specialized in this space, which occupies an ever more important share of our time, of our resources, as we are working on these platforms. As a good example, the exercise that we are doing today. The approach of the 5 countries has been a bit somewhat different. I mean, I think everyone is following the digital identity experience in India, the points kind of credit rating point related exercise in China, and all of the platforms that are applied to China, including the way that internet is regulated. I had the experience of living in China for a number of years, and I'm aware Russia has its own approach, and of course Brazil and South Africa in a different way are also working and approving new laws regarding, there's a huge debate. You follow that very closely and have written about it, Professor Luca, in Brazil. So I think that there is a lot of room for collaboration, for institutional experimentalism, which I believe it's good in this first stages. But the best, I think, approach is collaboration. I mean, sharing best practices, understanding that there are no borders in this world, and even coming from the development finance world, we have followed a number of interesting and challenging situations. For instance, the attack to the development bank of a South Asian country not long ago, of a very poor country, and more recently there was an episode with the National Mexican Development Bank as well. So these are real threats, and as someone said rightly, it's not a matter of whether you have or not. Either you have been hacked, you are currently being hacked, or you will be hacked in the near future. So this is a reality that it has become business as usual, and we need to adapt to this new world of ours.
And Sérgio, you strike a right chord indeed. And what is your work on the ground in your institution, a development bank, the Development Bank of Minas Gerais, very prestigious institutions that invest also a lot in technology. And so how do you think that development banks can support and encourage the development of technologies that can help strengthen cybersecurity?
Well, we work in many ways, right? We are certainly and most known for being credit providers. So here in Minas Gerais, we work very strongly with SMEs, with small, micro and small and medium companies. They account for, last year they accounted for roughly 1/3 of our portfolio, so around R$1 billion, very close to R$1 billion of operations with them. We have been very active in the venture capital space, being investors to third-party managed funds, so 10 different venture capital funds that we have invested in this space. We have a few direct equity investments from the bank. And most importantly, we've been working with the innovation environment, so the sort of the startup hubs around the state, and we have created our own fintech hub in the bank. There is a physical space here in partnership with LM Ventures and Santander Bank, the commercial bank, and we are now in our second batch, going to the third batch of companies, including in this very last batch, a company coming from India. So we are working not only with companies based in our good state of Minas Gerais, but also from other states of Brazil, and now most recently India. So we work as a knowledge platform, and that it's sort of going beyond the financial aspect of our work and servicing our clients through a digital platform, since we are not allowed to open branches. The Central Bank of Brazil forbids development banks to open branches. So to bridge that gap, we really operate at scale using our digital platform.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this, Sérgio. And thank you also for highlighting a very important and frequently underestimated point that in order to cope with digital challenges, but in reality with any kind of challenge, it is needed to have regulations, to have a plan, but it's also needed to have funding. And this is something that the Chinese have understood long ago, and thanks to this foresightedness, they are now in the top of the developers of new technologies. Speaking about China, Jiang, you are a good friend. You have been one of the first Cyberbrics fellows in Rio de Janeiro. You have been dealing with internet studies in China for a long time. You're an authority on this, and we have the pleasure to having you today with us, providing your insight on the cybersecurity policy landscape in China, and then we may perhaps discuss also a little bit how this relates with digital sovereignty. Min, thank you very much for being with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you for having me on this panel. I also very much appreciate Oliver's comments and Sergio's remarks that articulated the importance of the Brics grouping, as well as their exercise in their cyber realm. So allow me to shift the focus now specifically to China's cyber policy making. The details of my work on China's cybersecurity policies can be found in the freely downloadable book of the Cyberbricks book. I will use the time here to highlight a few aspects of China's cyber policy making. Can we have the slides up? Thank you very much. Next slide, please. 20 years ago, if someone says that China is going to be a cyber superpower in 2 decades, no one would believe it, not even the Chinese themselves, right? However, in 20 to 25 years' time, China's internet population has grown from almost 0 to 900 million today. Contrary to the once popular Western belief that China somehow would soon be liberated by the adoption of the market economy or by the internet, neither has happened. Next slide, please. Instead, over the last 2 decades, China has developed its own tech ecosystem, independent from the global system centered around Silicon Valley. In every category, from social media to web applications, China has its own national champions. Some have become quite successful globally, including Huawei, ZTE, Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok, which have been in the spotlight of international news recently. Next slide, please. Today's cyber governance, in my view, is dominated by 3 models. The Chinese model is state-centric, where the government plays a central role in building digital infrastructure, setting development agenda, and regulating data flows. The US approach is recognized by many to be market-centric, largely relying on US tech giants such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter, collecting and selling large amounts of user data for advertising dollars. Scholars have argued that the US model signals a new stage of capitalist development, that is surveillance capitalism. And others argue it resembles a new form of colonialism, that is data colonialism. EU, on the other hand, in my view, is trying to offer something different that is more human-centric. It tries to restore a dignity and integrity to data subjects through its GDPR privacy protection framework. So China has been actively promoting its cyber sovereignty agenda. Can you tap the space bar, please? Organizationally, the central government in China has set up the Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC, to coordinate cyber policymaking at the very highest level. In the last few years, a canopy of cyber laws and regulations have emerged. And in more concrete terms, several ambitious industrial plans, such as the Internet Plus Plan, One Belt, One Road Initiative, and Made in China 2025 plan have been released and are expected to be implemented. Next slide, please. So China's cyber policy making since the current President Xi Jinping took power in 2013 has been nothing but very systematic and ambitious. Most notably, for instance, in 2017, China passed the cybersecurity law. In the following year, it passed the e-commerce law. Currently, the drafts of 3 important data laws are under consideration. They deal with data security, cross-border data transfer, and personal data protection. So to a large extent, actually, in response to the changing global environment, because of GDPR is going into effect and has been taking some time to get implemented, and we'll wait and see how effective GDPR will be. Next slide, please. So next, let me highlight a few key features of China's cybersecurity and cyber policymaking, which often find themselves in the form of many paradoxes. First is the paradox of privacy protection and state control. While China's new personal data protection policies try to be GDPR compatible, these laws will in no way negate the government's access to and control over user data in China. There are rules and there are always exceptions to the rule. And second, while the central government in China puts incredible emphasis on security, for example, Sérgio talked about network security and data security, China's own cybersecurity goals are often also compromised by other competing political considerations. For example, China for the longest time has resisted more secure end-to-end encryption standards, thus has intentionally kept its cyber infrastructure vulnerable so that the state can actually gain access to surveil its citizens and stamp out political dissent. So to a large extent, a degree of cyber insecurity, if you will, is tolerated in exchange for political stability in the Chinese context. Third, China's data policy making, perhaps like many other countries, is still struggling to define what is important data, what is personal data. For China, important data that can cause threats to national security, economic, and social stability is not supposed to be exported. And yet, what is important and sensitive is often contextual. As we have learned from the Cambridge Analytica scandal back in 2016, during the presidential elections in the United States, seemingly harmless collection of Facebook user data can be weaponized to influence and compromise elections. For China, the political stability concern has been perennial. Fourth, the once deterritorialized free flow of data is increasingly giving way to data localization in many countries, including China. The drafted Chinese cross-border data transfer law specifically actually require foreign network operators that collect personal data from Chinese subjects to designate a legal representative on Chinese territory so that they can be answerable to the legal ramifications of data transfers. And fifth, China does criminalize online rumor, stipulating that individuals, for instance, who fabricate or deliberately spread false information about pandemics and disasters, for instance, that can seriously disturb social order can face up to 3 to 7 years in prison. Ironically, in the COVID-19 case, however, the Wuhan police charged 8 of its residents for spreading misinformation, which unfortunately turned out to be true. Sixth, despite operating in a top-down bureaucratic fashion, Chinese cyber policymakers have also come up with very interesting and innovative policy solutions, including, for instance, addressing urgent problems such as algorithmic price discrimination and deepfake, for instance, by requiring businesses to clearly label content as synthetic when they are generated by big data or AI, artificial intelligence. So finally, let me close by saying a few words about the tech confrontation between China and the United States. It is a dimension of the ongoing great power rivalry between the two countries, incumbent power, that is the United States, and a rising power, that is China, reminiscent of the rivalry between the United States and Soviet Union throughout the Cold War and the US and Japan in the 1980s. So this confrontation has just begun, as we have seen, especially in the past few years under President Trump. This confrontation has been elevated to new levels. One can reasonably argue that the balkanization of the internet has always been with us for quite some time, at least as old as the Chinese Great Firewall itself, except this time the US is sealing the wall, so to speak, from the other side, forcing countries to pick sides. In this context, the Brics grouping presents a really interesting, fascinating case study of the grouping sometimes incoherent, incomprehensible relations. While India has banned hundreds of Chinese apps, for instance, it has allowed Huawei to be in the country's 5G working group, while Brazil, face a lot of pressure from the United States, especially from President Trump, to drop Huawei from its 5G rollout. Brazil won't ban, as I learned today, actually, Huawei after all in Brazil. But this is the world we live in. The US has been sort of, in my view, an empire in decline for some time now. After the disastrous neoliberal policies that have funneled wealth and power overwhelmingly to the top since at least the 1980s, America has, throughout the pandemic, finally really imploded. The Iraq War, 2008 financial crisis, Trumpism, and the pandemic-induced recession, which combined to put the US into at least $10 trillion in debt, are both symptoms and contributing factors to America's decline. So America's decline, in this sense, has created space for new powers and new power alliances. This is not to say that groups, Brics countries don't have their own personal problems or are a coherent bloc by any means. But as Oliver has articulated earlier, Brics countries have a lot to say about the South-to-South cooperations and what a post-Western world might look like. So thank you so much. I've shared some thoughts about China's cyber policy making and practices, and look forward to the Q&A session and continue our conversation.
Thank you very much, Min, for this very acute and pragmatic considerations. I really like the fact that you stress also these tensions ongoing. On the one hand, for instance, China has been very strong in regulation of the use of digital technologies. On the other hand, China has already just approved a new civil code with the right to privacy and the right to protection of personal information for 1.5 billion citizens. They are studying the implementation and the design of a new data protection law. They are spearheading a new global data security initiative. So there is a lot of tensions already in what is going on, and this is probably the nature also of it explained probably by the fact that Brics countries, do not forget they are developing countries, and many of them, they are still in search of a precise stance on many issues, and they are still evolving in their economies, and also in their although many of them have very strong and secular cultures, and they still are trying to figure out what is the best stance, the best position in some very thorny issues. Now, before we open for a couple of questions, we regret not having Anya Kovac with us, but we have a video from our Cyberbricks board member, Nikhil Pahwa, who has very kindly agreed to share his perspective on India and digital sovereignty with a last-minute invitation. Fortunately, he is one of the most knowledgeable persons on this topic, and so it was very easy for him as an act of friendship to send us a short video. So we now have a short video from Nikhil Pahwa, and then we will be back for a Q&A.
Hi, Luca. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and Cyberbricks about cyber sovereignty. I'm sorry I can't be there today, but cyber sovereignty is one of the main themes that is playing out in India, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. I can go on about it for an hour, but I'm going to keep this down to 8 minutes as you've requested. Look, what's happening in India right now is that it's just a massive user base that is consuming more and more data and generating more and more data. So just for context, right? It's just yesterday the Indian IT minister, while announcing new intermediary guidelines, which seem to be targeted largely at social media, but also at Indian news outlets and streaming services like Netflix and Amazon, highlighted that WhatsApp has 530 million users in India. Facebook has some 420 million. Twitter has about 175 million. So in a country with about almost 800 million internet connections, and we assume around 650 to 700 million internet users, it's one of the most influential countries from a user-based perspective. For many companies, it's the largest market. We've got the lowest data rates in the country at about 13 US cents to a GB, and the data consumption is about 12 GB per user per month, and it's been growing rapidly. The cost has also been increasing a little bit, but the data consumption is increasing rapidly because of how cheap it is. And this is because most of the connections in India are broadband. Now, what the impact that such a large scale of users being online has is that the Indian government wants to now starts thinking about the impact that digital has on its sovereignty. And there have been historical issues with MLATs, with access to data for law enforcement, but now it's become more about economics. So, while India matters to most of the large tech startups, they really don't matter as much to the Indian government because they want to claim sovereignty and they don't want to have those large platforms collect more and more data. So if I go back to India at the UN, at the open-ended working group on cyber, a document was published with India's position on it and then taken down. So I don't know whether it's India's real position, but what that document said was it recommended a new form of sovereignty, which would be based on ownership of data, rather than on the territory or the physical location. So they said that the territorial jurisdiction would be on the data which is owned by the citizens, irrespective of the place where the data is physically located. Now, and this was pulled down. So I guess India's position is different, and we don't know how it's looking at it. But we've heard the phrase "data is the new oil" umpteen times over the last few years. And even when India is looking at data protection, it's looking at it from an economic growth perspective, from trying to reduce the loss of control over data, looking at addressing the dominance of global platforms, and most importantly, a phrase we're hearing a lot is digital colonization. So last year was one of the biggest and most impactful moments where India banned Chinese apps twice, in fact, in August and September in 2020, because of a face-off across in a very uninhabitable part of the Himalayas between Chinese and Indian troops. And this was a political decision taken. But there was also a restriction in Chinese investment in the beginning of the pandemic. in India. But this is the ban on Chinese apps has continued and been formalized, so much so that TikTok, which was banned in August, continued to remain in India, and subsequently now has fired many of its key employees in India, and pretty much looks like it's on its way to shutting operations because they don't see the scope of India allowing those apps again. But India's also, in terms of data flows, they've pushed back at the G20 with the DFFT agreement. They've not signed that. They've pushed back on RCEP. So the core focus of the Indian government is to retain as much control over data as possible and have that data largely with Indian organizations so that the Indian government can control them. So post the ban on TikTok, there was a support for Atmanirbharta or self-reliance, and there was an Atmanirbharta app challenge, and a new app called Ku became more popular, and now that has support of the Indian government, especially given its face-off with Twitter. The personal data protection bill at some shape or form looks to localize data. WhatsApp payments was prevented from launching in India for a long time because the Indian government wanted to localize data there. There's a non-personal data framework, which again looks to give the Indian ecosystem more access to data. So data is at the heart of sovereignty in India. Whether it comes to e-commerce, whether it comes to payments on content, health data is also expected to eventually be localized. So the Indian government wants to retain control, and that control is either itself or through Indian apps. The joke that I make is to some extent that India has China envy. It doesn't want to necessarily go the way China has, with a disproportionate amount of control over the internet in its country. But India is looking at a fourth way, which is not the US way, not the EU way, not the China way, but somewhere in between. And so that's why there's more control that's being exercised, because they honestly view data as a new oil. They feel it's necessary for artificial intelligence. The leaked e-commerce policy called it intellectual capital. Nandan Nilekani, one of India's tech billionaires, has gone out and said that India is a data-rich country. So if as a country, if you view data as a national resource, if you view it as a resource, you would then try and digitize everything, generate more data, have more control over it, and use it to grow your own tech ecosystem and push back against a global ecosystem that is now in your country, has invested a lot of money, but is basically looking at a land grab to become dominant, and is already dominant in the country. So the pushback is coming when you look at social media. There's a strong pushback from local Indian organizations in e-commerce against Amazon. India set up the unified payments interface, UPI, as a means of payment to counter the rails that are owned by Visa and MasterCard. There's an equalization levy from a taxation perspective, because India wants to address the way global corporations work in terms of setting up entities across the globe, and India feels that it's losing tax money. I think one other strong push for localization is coming in from a law enforcement perspective. There is a requirement now, or that's being worked on, that needs cloud companies to register with the Indian government to operate in the country, or register with a self-regulatory organization, and then so that the Indian government can then exercise control over them. Many of these players have also started storing data in the country. There is a strong pushback from Indian companies, also Indian businesses, against Google regarding its imposition of a 30% tax or a 30% fee for app purchases in India. There are sedition cases against Twitter executives. Strong pushback when it came to WhatsApp's privacy policy. I mean, I could go on. There is just so much that is happening in India right now. in terms of the country trying to assert its sovereignty, that I think things are just escalating really, really, really rapidly right now. And this is happening from an economic perspective, from a security perspective. All of this is at the heart of what's happening in cyber sovereignty in India. I hope you found this useful. I'm sorry I can talk more, but I guess we're running out of time. Happy to have helped. Thanks.
Great to have also this perspective from India, and even if neither Anya nor Nikhil were able to join us directly, it's excellent to have this food for thought. Also because, as Nikhil was mentioning rightly, it has been at the center, India has been at the center of a quarrel, an intra-Brics quarrel with regard to digital sovereignty, with the ban of more than 50 Chinese apps last year. And indeed, one of the questions that were raised by our participants is how is going to digital sovereignty being reconciled with internal Brics ambitions? Is it something that is going to fragment internet, the digital sovereignty discourse and policies? Are they going to fragment internet amongst Brics countries, or on the contrary, are they a reason to further cooperate and to enhance cooperation on digital matters? I would like to have the impressions, to collect the impressions and thoughts of our participants for this last part of the debate. So what do you think? We can maybe start from Oliver, Sergio, and Min, so that we follow the order. Oliver, what do you think?
Yeah, very briefly, because we have cybersecurity specialists here, so I don't want to take too much of the time. But I do want to emphasize what Sérgio said here, that when the BRICS summit took place several years ago in South Africa, the issue of digitization was key. And it was really, I must say, quite fascinating how the media in general, particularly in the developed world, kind of looked at this and said, what could these countries, possibly have to say about something that is really the stuff of, very advanced, rich countries. And the fact, I think there was a bit of, a prejudice also, the fact that this summit took place in South Africa, in Africa, and, you connected this with, an issue about, technology, created an impression in sort of the mainstream media that, this was just a topic which had little relevance. And it was quite fascinating that the repercussions this had in sort of mainstream media was extremely limited. But since then, there's been a tremendous debate about the role that technology and regulation of internet governance, etc., can play to overcome specifically the challenges that countries in the developing world are facing. And I must say, this was completely new to me. I was at the summit in South Africa, and since then I've been following this. And since then, and I'm an example of this, of how I've been able to establish a dialogue with scholars from BRICS countries around the world. And just this week, I had several discussions about how what policies can be put in place to avoid that the arrival of 5G deepens inequality, which obviously 5G will initially be available in cities, and how to assure that this doesn't exacerbate the urban-rural divide, which already exists across BRICS countries, also outside of BRICS countries, of course. So to my mind, this entire topic now has become, is one of the key issues that's at the heart of BRICS cooperation. And given how much more of the economies, the global economy, will be part of this digital realm, I expect this let's say the percentage of debates at BRICS countries and of debates at BRICS summits to increase ever more. And as I've said in my previous remarks, I think at this upcoming summit, this entire debate about cybersecurity, cyber issues in general, and how this relates to the day-to-day challenges of BRICS countries is one of the key topics.
Thank you, Oliver. And indeed, yes, you raise a very excellent point of 5G, which has a completely new network architecture, and for which China is one of the, I would say, the leading producer of equipment in the world. Brazil will have in the next months the spectrum auction for 5G, so a lot of attention on this topic indeed, and also a lot of investments required to develop the new 5G infrastructure, which is extremely costly, and the development risks to, as you were rightly pointing, to exacerbate further the divide between rural and urban areas. Speaking about development, Sérgio, your insights on this latest topic of cybersecurity and cyber sovereignty, please.
Luca, I believe that the issue of security in general, and that includes cybersecurity, has always been one of the key features of the BRICS sort of creation, the evolution, the reason to be. I mean, there are, and this is interesting too. Over the years, I had the opportunity of participating in several meetings, either official, academic, and of other natures. But the first BRIC meeting, still BRIC, not excluding South Africa, that I participated was back in 2008. I used to work for the federal government of Brazil as a special advisor to one of the ministers, and I attended the BRIC meeting of national security advisors in Moscow that took place in Hotel President, right across the river from the Kremlin. And countries were represented by very high-profile officers. China was represented by Dai Bingguo. India was represented by Mr. Narayana. And Russia was represented by Mr. Patrushev. And Brazil was represented by Minister Unger, who's now a professor at Harvard Law School. But the issue of security was a key issue. Over the years, we've been following several issues related to border fractions between China and Russia, between China and India more recently, of course. And I think that expands to the cyber world in a very interesting way, which is countries, and each of the 5 ones have, of course, a vested interest in really bringing their population to be covered, to have coverage by internet with quality and at cheap prices. This is already a reality. Huawei has been working in Brazil with an R&D installation in our good state of Minas Gerais for almost 20 years. They have a branch in Inatel, which is the telecommunication institute in Brazil, as well as Ericsson and all the major players. They've been here for 20 years. They've been participating and employing Brazilians and working not only selling the telephones, but also, of course, in the network. And it's only natural that they will be continue to play and be a player in the future, as they provide good quality devices that are affordable, right? Of course, there will be strategic decisions to be made regarding national security, maybe creating a second network that is completely disconnected and safer than this one. I mean, the public debate you are already aware of, but I don't see any reason or for not having the BRICS, especially China and India, playing a very, very important role in this universe in coming years, and including as of right now in all of the 5 countries, and of course in many other countries around the world. I think this is a reality that is there, and that the 5 members, especially the other ones, should take advantage of having the Brics arrangement to settling any kind of differences and making specific agreements that are of their national interest. We should be very pragmatic about this.
Indeed, a very good dose of pragmatism is always helpful. And you are perfectly right also in highlighting that actually maybe not with formal international treaties and agreements, but on the ground between businesses, Brics and intra-Brics cooperation is something that goes on since already some decades. Jiang, your last word before we wrap up, as we are already running out of time.
Thank you for the comments from both Oliver and Sergio on this issue. And I think if we consider the large populations that the BRICS countries have, over 3 billion people, the BRICS solutions to issues of digital sovereignty, to digital divide, would offer really interesting, I think, models for the rest of the world to grapple with. And they are already mechanisms of cooperation and connection between these 5 countries. And I don't see why they cannot offer something innovative and pragmatic approaches to these very thorny issues. Also, one important context, I think, important to keep in mind when we talk about BRICS, in relation to Western power, especially the United States, they are trust issues when it comes to cybersecurity. And because of Snowden affairs, which really exposed the threat of security from a Western power, in this case, the United States, China is not necessarily, I think, compared to the United States, a bad solution, when it comes to cyber networks and cybersecurity issues. So as we have seen, even India and Brazil haven't blocked China in its 5G considerations and rollouts. The definition for cyber sovereignty is varied, and I think China, for the most part, advances this notion to assert, a state power over digital networks, over its data, over its population. EU also talks about digital sovereignty, but more in the sense of having alliance and collaboration between EU member countries. So ultimately, cyber policies and digital policies are about power. And I think we're increasingly paying attention to who gains and who loses in the process. Are they individuals, powerful governments, or tech giants? And this question about a digital divide, I think, point to the heart of the issue of power ultimately.
And you are very right, Min, to highlight this. And indeed, the digitalization of the opportunities that have been, well, the needs more than opportunity that have been highlighted by the last year of pandemics represent a huge opportunity when you are selling network equipment and you are in the business of connectivity. It is also very right to point out that there might be very legitimate concerns about espionage, but also that so far, at least from a Brazilian perspective, the only evidence that exists about international espionage using national technology do not point toward China, but toward another country, or maybe with his ICE partners. So it is also, if one wants to be really pragmatic and elaborate policies that are evidence-based, indeed one needs to look at evidence. What we are trying to offer also with this first book on Cyberbricks is evidence. I'm also very pleased that the conversation turned toward connectivity, because it's a great pleasure to announce that we are in the process of finalizing the peer review of our mapping of internet access policies in the Brics. That is the work we have been doing last year. So we have now mapped. We are actually the only existing project that has mapped all the internet access policies and connectivity policies of the Brics. We are going to release this in the upcoming months on our website. We already have several interactive tools that compare, for instance, data protection frameworks. We will build more to compare internet access and connectivity policies. We hope that this is indeed useful not only for researchers, for internet users, but also for policymakers, decision makers that are called to take decisions based on evidence, and we are here indeed to offer evidence. Now, I would like to thank very much all the participants for their excellent presentation, the excellent ideas they have shared, their friendship, and I would love to have you here again over the year or for the next Cyberbricks webinar. I'm sure there will be many more occasions to work together, and I really look forward to further Brics and Cyberbricks cooperation. Thank you very much, and have an excellent day. Ciao, ciao.